does many things, missionary work, wears many hats. So this time he's going to speak to us from Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2, rebuilding the wall.
I just really my readers with me, so if I stumble over a little bit, or I might hold it close, or if somebody has a 1.25 with them and they want to hold them up, I would gladly wear those in a little bit. But if you don't have it, that's all right. We'll just make it up as we go along. In the book of Nehemiah, chapter 1 and chapter 2, we see this individual who desires to be a leader for God. This is somebody who wants to lead God's people back to a restoration, back to a way that it used to be, or maybe that it never was, but it always should have been. And so you remember Nehemiah as he stands before Artaxerxes and he whispers that prayer, and they talk to this idea of how we ought to live in this leadership role of Nehemiah and all of the incredible aspects of what happens in the book of Nehemiah. In the book of Ezra, as you've already studied and completed during your summer series, we look at the second return. There's been one with Zerubbabel, there's been a second with Ezra, and now Nehemiah is going to lead a third return back to Jerusalem in an attempt to restore now the walls. The city has been restored a little bit. Ah, there you go. I knew somebody would take this hint. Thank you. They're not exactly the color I was looking for, but that's all right. Oh, these are great. Look at that. They're right up here on me. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So now I'm going to point these at you for a while, and then I'll put them on and take them off, and I'll poke myself in the eye twice. So when you see now as this second, third now return, there's only about 100,000 people who are returning. And that's one of the first aspects we look and we say, in my mindset in 2022, as a New Testament Christian living in Marion County, West Virginia, sometimes I think about this concept of why are there not more people going back? Why didn't everybody return? Because this is referred to as captivity. This is referred to as a time that they were taken away, they were enslaved, led away likely with fish hooks so they wouldn't run out of line. This is not the right place. This is not your home. But the Persians and the Babylonians and the individuals who often did the carrying away, they would acclimate you to their society. They would teach you the language. They would teach you the political structure. They would find you a job. They would get you integrated into their society so that when this time period left and you were able to go home, well, nobody wants to go home. And think about this. It's been 70 years, so we at least have 2, maybe even 3 generations that's not home anymore. Think about it this way. In my family, if you trace the heritage back, we don't have much nobility. We got some notoriety, but we don't have much nobility. Chicken thieves and moonshiners, you get there eventually, you just say, that's good enough. We don't want to go back any farther than this. But my family comes from an area, we always called it Dutch Wells. And there's a lot of pals over there. There's a lot of people that this is where my family comes from. And every so often, when I was younger, the great-grandparents and the great-great-grandparents would talk about what their stories were from their parents of the old country. I like to hear the stories. I'd like to get on a plane and fly over and see the rock structures that they talked about in the yards. But if the congregation opens up there, wherever I'm from, and they said, hey, we need a preacher, would you like to come over and be our full-time minister? Absolutely not. I don't know those people. I don't know their culture. I don't know who they are. That's not it's my ancestry, but it's not who I am. And so when you open up Nehemiah and you see that far less than 10% are returning back, these individuals are not motivated to go. And when they get home, home's not what they thought it was going to be. The temple is not what it once was, that Solomon built and David prepared, and it's not what I thought it was going to be. And the old people who were still alive, when they saw the temple, they wept, because what had been rebuilt paled in comparison to what they had originally seen and was able to experience. The city's not rebuilt, the temple's not completed, and the wall is now in such disrepair that it's become a reproach. And Jerusalem is no longer this great nation of people, they're now a reproach. They are now looked down upon. And Nehemiah, who has been told the stories and who remembers everything that they have gone through, Nehemiah has a longing. He wants to go home because to him, this is home. This is where I need to be. This is God's desire for us to go and to do these things, but he really doesn't know how to go about it. There is something that is laid heavy on his heart, but he just doesn't know, how do we get this completed? There's no sense of national identity. There's no nucleus that we're able to come around and build upon. They're a lost people. They have no direction. And they're not sure how to complete what it is that they need to do. As a matter of fact, when you read Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, they're all contemporaries and they're all together in the same period of time in what was occurring at this time. And what's fascinating is you're not going to see the messianic prophecies. You're not going to see in these books the specific mention of Christ and the anticipation of when Christ is going to come. Now, there are other books that are within this time period, Haggai, Malachi, others, that they talk about the Messiah, and the Messiah is to come. But right now in Ezra, you don't see that. In Nehemiah, you don't see that. Ezra and Nehemiah, you already know this. That was one book originally, and then we, in our canon of 66 books, we separated those two out, probably by the same author. But you're going to notice this thread of there's a lack of vision in the people. The leaders, Ezra, Zerubbabel, other individuals like Mordecai, there are a few, like Nehemiah, who know where we need to go. How are we going to get there? And what is it that we're going to do to be able to get there? Nehemiah is the last chronological book of the Old Testament. There's a 400-year period of time, that intertestament period we call it, where Malachi's prophecies are all written, but it's this time period of Nehemiah, this is it. Then you have that gap going into the idea of now here is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the life of Christ and all that begins. Now, often when we look at the book of Nehemiah, we talk about leadership. And there's a good reason we talk about leadership, because this is a model book of how you ought to lead. But that's not the main purpose of the book. The main purpose is not for us to look at the book of Nehemiah and develop ourselves as leaders, although there are great qualities to see in what he was able to do public, to speak, what he was able to do to get people motivated, what he was able to do in crisis, and to be able to diminish that crisis and to lessen the emotion and the hysteria that was going on, and to be able to get people to do great things under great duress. And not be intimidated by the naysayers and the negative and all the drama that goes on anytime you decide to do a work of God. That Nehemiah was incredible at leading people. But my opinion, and the opinion of many others, is that this is God working through Nehemiah. And how do we allow God to work through us? How do we begin to humble our hearts, to stable our mind, and to begin to say, through your word, God, lead me. Show me, God, how to navigate the difficult spots in my life. Help me, Lord, to be able to bring these people along with me, but help me especially to be able to understand, God, how to lead myself. I've got to shepherd my own soul. I've got to pick out the log in my own eye before I deal with specks in other people's. And many times that's not what we want to do. I'm great. I'm telling you, one of my great qualities is to tell you your faults and to ignore mine. Or I can tell you the bad things that you do, but I'm going to diminish the things that I do. And God says we got to look at ourselves, and then we begin to look at others. It's a biblical principle that Jesus taught. You got to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so there is a love that I have to have for myself, and now to go out and to be able to talk to my neighbors and work with them. People talk about leadership and what Nehemiah was able to do once getting to Jerusalem, taking his observations of what is happening, and then getting the people organized in 52 short days. They were able to build the entire wall back. And people look at this and they say, this is incredible, and it is incredible. But then you look at the reasons they were able to do it, and the Bible tells us the people had a mindset. They set their minds to do this work, to accomplish it, and to get it done. And nothing's going to stop me. Now, when I say, do you have something you want to do, I don't mean about building a fence around your house. I don't mean about having the nicest yard. I'm saying when you think about your life as a father, mother, husband, wife, daughter, son, as a child created in the image of God, do you have something that you want to get done? I want to get this sin that so easily ensnares me and get it out of my life. I want to get this restored in my life. I want to get this tuned up in my life. Follow the people in the book of Nehemiah who set their mind and said, I'm not going to let anything stop me. I'm going to do exactly what God has told me to do. Let's turn over through my special glasses in Nehemiah chapter 1 and verses 1 through 4, and let's look at what is happening here in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Now, this is not a verse-by-verse study. We're going to do a summary, and then we're going to try to find 3 aspects of these 2 chapters that we can apply to our lives. And when we walk out of here this evening, our goal is to be able to say, okay, these are things I want to work on this week. This is something I want to see that I begin to adapt and adjust in my life. So in Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, here is where you begin to see the beginning of the summary of what's happening. Now, notice in chapter 1, verse 1, it does not say, I, Nehemiah, the great cupbearer of Artaxerxes, who was able to lead as governor over Jerusalem. It's not like that. This is not the book of Ecclesiastes, for example, where in the book of Ecclesiastes, I, the preacher, and then he begins to explain who he is. Or what we would see from the Apostle Paul, I, the Apostle Paul, sent by Jesus Christ, grace, mercy, and peace to... This is not how the book begins. This book begins, you don't know who Nehemiah is until chapter 1, verse 11. Not until the end of chapter 1, verse 11, do we understand the high position and the influence that he has over the king of Persia, Artaxerxes. At first, he says, I want you to understand what was going on and the overwhelming aspect of how this is bothering me. So we are going to read verses 1 through 4. Read with me here. It says, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakkiah, it came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the citadel. I'm in the capital city of Persia. Some people call it Susa, some people call it Shushan, all different names for it, but it's the capital city. And Nehemiah says, this is where I was, and it was sometime what we would call autumn. Summertime is over, fall is beginning. And then my brother, chapter 1, verse 2, one of my brethren, Hanani, he comes with some others, probably went with Ezra on that second return, and now are coming back to get supplies, to tell people what's going on, to visit family. Nehemiah asks a question. How are the survivors? Now again, this gives us some insight in chapter 1 and verse 3. In chapter 1 and verse 3, he tells them about the survivors. After 70 years, the nation has not restored itself. After 70 years, they are still looked at as victims. After 70 years, they are still considered people who are of a feeble mindset and ability. And when he hears, nothing has improved. Zerubbabel's went back, Ezra's went back. It's been 12 years, and we still have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of problems. And in chapter 1 and verse 4, Nehemiah says, I wept, and I prayed, and I fasted. I did everything that I knew to do. I didn't know what I was able to do, and I just kept going to God over and over and over and asking God, what's going on? The survivors. You know, after a while, we don't think about ourselves as survivors or victims or patients. We just start to go back to life, and we acclimate back to a portion of life that we're able to have, and they're still there. They still have the trauma, and they're still living the trauma, and they've not organized to the point that they're able to get over it. As a matter of fact, the gates are burned with fire, and that literally means that the gates into the city, all the protection is gone. But the fact that the gates still burn with fire means this is happening over and over. because we have not restored, because we have not rebuilt, because we have not made the changes that we need to make, we get raided all the time. So anytime we stack the temple, anytime we do everything we need to do, people just come in and they take from us all over again. Nehemiah, it's bad, and we don't see how it's going to get any better. And so what we find is Jerusalem is a broken city filled with discouraged people. So frustrated. You know in mindset how they feel. You've been through tragic trauma, problems. You've seen people go through it, and it's just like there's nothing. I know what needs to happen here, but I can't get it done. For whatever mindset, for whatever reason, and there is Nehemiah who is looking at this, and he says, so when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept. And in chapter 1 and verse 4, that's very powerful, because what we see is the impact after 70 years, potentially never even being in this place. He has such a longing for the people, God's people, that he's emotionally connected to this. There's a serious and significant problem that is happening. And so now in chapter 1, verses 5 through 11, he makes a plea to God. And he's praying. This plea is a request. Anytime we make a plea to God, a plea is we begin to set in order, God, here is how I see it. And God, here are some things I would like to see happen. God, here are some problems that I've observed, but here are how these problems could be dealt with. And that's okay. You're allowed to tell God your plan. You're allowed to tell God this is how you see it. You're able to talk to God and tell God, hey, this is specifically what's going on, and here's what I need. Isn't that what Jesus said? Give us this day our daily bread. God already knows you got to eat. He's the one who made you this way. But he also says, I want you to pray to me for it so that I can see your reliance upon me for these things. It's not a one-time prayer, and it's not a prayer at the time of event. And that's significant because he says, I prayed about this and prayed about this and prayed about this. And look what it says in chapter 1 and verse 5. Now the season has changed, 5 through 11. It's been 4 months. We become discouraged so many times when I pray to God, open my eyes, and it's not right in front of me. We become discouraged when I say, dear God, influence this person's heart, and their heart isn't influenced the next time I see them. And I say, I don't understand why God doesn't answer my prayers. It's been 3 days. And I've already told God what happened. I even cried when I told God what happened. And then God didn't fix it. And this person still died. This person's still upset with me. This person won't have anything. This person's still causing division. This person's still... Why doesn't God listen to me? It's been 4 months. And Nehemiah hasn't stopped. And this is not just the opportunity where he gets up to speak to Artaxerxes and make his request. This is now Nehemiah in preparation for an event that he hopes with expectation is going to occur. He doesn't even know if he'll get the audience and the ability to speak. Just because he's the cupbearer doesn't mean he can say whatever he wants. This is just in preparation that eventually we'll get to this point that I'm able to have this. And so he desires not only to see God fulfill his promise. And by the way, in chapter 1, verses 5 through 11, he's not telling God, you've not kept your promise. Now, God, you've got to do it. He's not wagging his hand at God. He is telling God, we know and remember Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy chapter 30. We remember what our people were told, and God, we believe it. And I just want your promise to be now. And I want to be a part of it. I want to see this restoration, and I want to help, and I want to be involved in these things. There were many young women, when you think about the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14, that from a young maiden, the salvation of the world was going to come through a woman. I would believe it's fair to say that there were many women who would pray to God, let me be the vessel. Let me bring your son to this world. Let me bring the salvation. Let it be me. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. God, I see the good works that are going on. Let me be a part of that good work. Here, the elders here have decided to take on this work. Let me get involved in this work. Let me be a part of this and help this work. Not that I may have the glory. That's where it becomes wrong. Oh, I want to be the mother of Jesus. And that way I can look at all those people and I can tell them what they've been. That's not what Nehemiah is doing. Nehemiah says, I see the problem, and God, I want to help. I want to be a part of what we are able to do. And chapter 1 and verse 11 is that incredible passage. "O Lord, I pray, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant. I am your vessel. I am your to do with. You tell me, and that's how it'll get done. You show me, and this is what I will do. And to the prayer of your servants," not just me, but there are many people, God, who are looking for this restoration, who desire to fear your name. There are still people who know who God Jehovah is, and we still fear his name, and we want to do what is right. Let your servant prosper this day. Let me see success in your victory, I pray. And then he says, "And grant him mercy. Grant me, your service, mercy in his," that's Artaxerxes' sight. God, I'm looking for an opportunity, and I want to be able to do your work. Now look at chapter 2 and verse 1. It's another month. It's the month of Nisan, and that's about March, April. It's been at least 4 months, potentially 5 months. He's just prayed and prayed and prayed, and then one day it happens. Now let's talk about very quickly the cupbearer and the importance of the cupbearer. The cupbearer is not a butler. In our Western view, we get limited sometimes when we read Old Testament passages, and even a lot of the things that happen in the New Testament that we don't understand because it's not within our culture, it's not within our experience, and we've got a limited worldview. And every generation and every people through all history of time have had limited worldviews because my experience is limited to this, and a few stories before, and a few expectations that's going to happen. But other than that, this is what I know. A cupbearer is not a butler. A cupbearer had a great responsibility. Now think about the time set, the technology, and all that's happening, that Nehemiah, as the cupbearer, he is chief of staff. Second most powerful man in the U.S., and people say in the world, is the chief of staff to the president. Not the vice president. The chief of staff is going to say where the president goes, who the president will speak to, what the agenda is going to be, what the food purchase is going to be, who comes in, who goes out. Everything is controlled by the chief of staff. The president is the one who has the authority, but the chief of staff has the second most influential position. That's Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the head of the Secret Service. Where the president goes, all the prep work that has to be done. There are 0 days off. There are 0 sick days. You cannot come and go as you please. Anytime he eats, you've got to eat first. Anytime he drinks, you've got to drink first. You are so vital and important. But then the Persians have these laws, and they notoriously keep these laws that you cannot just change or do whatever you want to do. For example, you're not allowed to be sad in front of the king. By the way, sounds great, horrible. Horrible. I heard a preacher one time talking about Nehemiah. I was listening to it, kind of getting some thoughts and materials, and the individual says, "Wouldn't that be great? Nobody can ever be sad around you." And on the surface, I think, yeah, wouldn't that be great? But it's not real. You can't be happy all the time. I worked in a mental health hospital for a while, and I remember when we would have our group sessions and we would gauge their mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And they were typically 2s and 1s and 3s. And I always asked the question, where would you like it to be? And they'd say 9, 10. And I'd say, okay, that takes cocaine. We can't do that. We can't do that. And they look at me like, well, what's yours? And I was like, I'm about 6.5, 7. Oh. You can't be in 9 and 10. Those are birthdays and flashbulb moments. Everything was perfect. Everything was great. And those days, it's like the red line in your car. You can only run at that pace for so long and you burn out. Or you're faking it and you're not dealing with the real set of emotions and the issues that are going on in your life. And you're eating that up, and all of a sudden I'm a little teapot and I burst. But to never be sad, to never show any emotion, you can only be joyful, satisfied, happy. And then one day in Nehemiah in chapter 2 and verse 1, 4 months later, 5 months later, Nehemiah speaks up, Artaxerxes speaks up, and he says, "Why are you sad?" And look what the Bible says there in those verses, in chapter 2 and verses 1 and 2. And Nehemiah says, I was terrified. Because the Persian law says if the king notices that you're sad, he can make a decree off with your head. And we're not talking Alice in Wonderland. This is real life. Nehemiah responds and says, why should I not be sad? The people, my homeland, my heritage lay desolate. All of the problems that are going on, I'm sad because I don't know what to do. I have no way to help them. And then he says, what do you desire? What would it that you would like to happen? And the Bible says that he whispers a prayer. He says a prayer to God, and in my mind, this is happening within seconds. This is not 4 months. This is everything that I've been praying for. God, give me courage. Well, I tell you what, Artaxerxes, here's what I need. And so he asked him in chapter 2 and verse 4, what would you request? Chapter 2, verse 6, when will you return? Chapter 2 and verse 7, 8, and 9, what do you need? Now, if you're reading 7, 8, and 9, Artaxerxes does not specifically say, but you begin to see Nehemiah, who obviously feels comfortable answering the question. This is important because it's an important time in Nehemiah's life and in his opportunity to be able to express, here's what's going on and here's what could help. If we could do this, if we could see these things happen. In chapter 2, verses 10 through 20, you kind of see the setting for the rest of the book and what they're going to have to do. In chapter 4, you see the wall is built halfway. In chapter 10, you see 9 and 10, you see the wall is completed. Chapter 6, in 52 days, all of these things have happened. But in chapter 2, in verses 10 through 20, you begin to see opposition and the problems that Nehemiah and the people that he will be leading are going to have to endure. So he inspects and considers the issue, 11 through 16. He gives a great speech in chapter 2, verses 17 through 18, where basically he says, you see the problem? Let's go do something. And it's like a hurrah, hurrah, let's go, let's go. And they all go and they start to build, and in 52 days they build the entire wall. It's amazing. But anytime you see a good work, there are these people who keep in a bag that you can't see these little balls of confetti, and they've got little barbs and spikes, and they're always throwing them. And they're called yabbits. We're going to build the wall. Yeah, but we've tried that before. It doesn't work. We're going to worship God and really get faith. Well, we tried that before, but it worked for like a month, and then everybody quit. We're going to start having fellowship dinners every month. There's certain foods I can't eat. Well, then don't eat that. Oh, you don't want me to eat? That's not what I said. Look, they don't want me to eat. They're so mean over there. That's not what I said. There's always those people. And they'll tear down a good work, and they'll divide a good congregation of God's people. They're naysayers, they're opposition, and let me tell you something, they will always be near. We got 15 minutes left. We're going to give 5 minutes apiece to this. Here we go. So let's make a practical application. I'm assuming that's right, and there's not like, that's my clock, right? A lot of you just looked back and went, oh, there's a clock back there. You're such good people. You don't look back when your preacher goes into overtime. You're so good. Remember Lot's wife, pillar of salt, that's all I'm saying. So when you think about these impacts and how it's going to apply to our life, here are 3 things I'm going to recommend that if you want to accomplish God's work, God's will in your life, number 1, ditch the drama. Go back to chapter 2 and look at verses 4 and 5. Chapter 2 and verses 4 and 5. And let's read through chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. Then the king said to me, what do you request? And so I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, verse 5, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah in the city of my father's tombs that I may rebuild it. Where's the drama? There's no drama. Let me show you. Let me show you what Nehemiah did not do. Maybe you've done this, maybe you've seen this. Nehemiah did not do this. Artaxerxes says, what do you request? And Nehemiah went, Tell you something, Xerxes, Artie. There have been things in my life that I could tell you, but I don't want to talk about that. You know what that is? That's called high drama. I said to God, dear God, be with me, or whatever the prayer was. But I know it didn't take a long time because you don't keep Artaxerxes waiting. You don't keep the king waiting. That's not the point. Remember, 4 months he's been with him, and he didn't just blurt in and say, hey, Artaxerxes, can I have a minute? I know I'm your second highest advisor. I know I'm the second in land. I'm your highest advisor. I hold the highest position that any Jew can have. Artaxerxes, I got a problem in my heart, and I need to talk with you. That's not how it works. And when the king says, what do you request? You don't go, well, let me think. Oh, I think. You don't do that. What do? You whisper a prayer to God and say, God, this is it. Thanks for the opportunity. Artaxerxes, here's what we need. You don't go on Facebook and say, my life is so messed up, you all. I just don't know if I can do it anymore. Unspoken prayer request. Don't ask me what's going on because I don't want anybody to know about this. I'm so embarrassed. I don't know if I can live anymore. Hashtag, my life stinks. Let me tell you something. That's funny, and I know it's funny, and I intend for it to be funny. It's ungodly. It's sinful. Stop doing it. That is not how we live. Listen, you want to tell somebody, pray for me? I can't tell you what's going on, but there's a situation in my life that I just need your prayer. That's okay. But you know the difference between that and ridiculousness. You know the difference between, well, wait a minute, I'm offended by that. You're telling me I can't take a deep breath before I say what I feel? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can't be obnoxious. I'm saying you can't be drama. I'm saying it's not, let me just bask in, everybody's waiting for me to talk. That's wrong. Now, if you don't believe it, do a Google search and do this because you'll be amazed at how many hits will come up on this. Is being a drama queen a sin? Universally, yep. It's wrong. And the other thing that it does, when you create all this drama, it brings all of this emotion and all of this baggage, and I can't wade through so I can get to the truth, so we can deal with it, so we can get to where we need to be. I can't make the repentance in my life. All that drama makes me worry about your repentance, not my repentance. I got to repent. No pause for effect, no digging up the past, no annoying Facebooks, no gossip, backbiting. Don't bite bikes either. That's weird. No busybodies, no telling everybody everything about everybody else. Stop. Get to the truth and let's deal with it. No passive-aggressive statements. Let's just talk. Let's tell the truth. When I'm at the school of preaching, I'm teaching on marriage and family. I tell them this is one of the hardest things you'll ever do when you deal with marriage, divorce, and remarriage issues and trying to sort out what's right and what's wrong. You got to take the emotion out of it. That's very hard to do. Even when we're not being dramatic and even when we're not trying to make a great scene, even when we're trying to be as honest and godly as we can, it's very hard to take that emotion out because what I feel is what I feel. And it influences me so much, but sometimes it pushes me to a side where I'm not godly. Nehemiah's identity was not in his problems. And he wasn't someone who created all of this drama to the point that he looked at it and he had a reputation. Everybody's like, oh, great, here comes Nehemiah. Oh, here, I got to go. I got to go. Because Nehemiah's coming. I don't want to deal with it. Don't be that person. And the way we do that is by saying, okay, you know what? Nehemiah dealt with it. He didn't make accusations that weren't true. He just brought the truth. And he said, I am sad. At the fear of my life being lost, I am sad, and here's why. Well, what could I do to help? Here's what you can do. It wasn't, let me tell you everything about it. No, it was, here's what you can do. Number 2. Starting at 9 minutes, I'm 1 minute behind. Hustle up. So in chapter 1 and verse 4, chapter 2, verses 7 through 9, you have to be diligent. You have to be focused. You have to have a mind ready to work even when you're disappointed. Even when this is not the way I thought it was going to happen. Many of us in the New Testament church today, many of us in the body of Christ, we have a problem. We've got Naaman mindset. Well, I thought it would go like this. I would come in, the prophet would come out, he'd wave his hand, there'd be some kind of confetti that would happen, and all of a sudden this great miracle, and there'd be like a band or something. And then I found out it was the Abana and the Pharpar. Those are really clean, and you want to go to the Jordan and 7 times dip. Nah, this is not right. And then Gehazi, who later makes mistakes, but Gehazi says to him, he says, you know, if he would have told you to do something great, that's what you'd have done, right? Right. Well, why not do this that's so easy? Take the drama out, the pomp and circumstance, and let's just be diligent. Let's be godly. Let's serve God to the very best of our ability. You are responsible for you, not me. And your actions and your sins, they impact me sometimes, but it's not going to stop me from going to heaven. Because I'm going to be diligent even when there's disappointment. He's sad, and he has a legitimate reason to be sad. Chapter 1 and verse 4 is a very, very sad verse. But he set a plan, and he got busy. Because he didn't have all that drama. He didn't have all of these side fires that he had to put out. He just said, let's focus on what we are doing and let's not get distracted from it. Let's set a plan and let's get busy. Chapter 2, verse 7, he has permission. He has authority to travel. Chapter 2, verse 8, I'm going to need these permits for resources. Chapter 2 and verse 9, I'm going to need these people who are going to protect everything that I need. Now let's get busy and let's get it done. And I wonder very quickly for just a moment, in chapter 2 and verse 6, the text never says this. This is just me wondering. You're not going to be king. Remember in chapter 2 and verse 6, how long will you be gone and when will you return? I'm going to be the king. I prayed to God for like 4 months and I think I'm retiring and God's going to put me as the king. No, that's my province over there, and I tell you what I'll let you do. I'll let you go to Jerusalem. You can be the governor for 2 terms, and you come back. And you restore to this role. Yeah, but that's not what I thought was going to happen. God, I prayed to you that this would happen, that these things would happen in their life, that they would come to me. Or I wanted these things to happen to these people so that I might be a part of them. Or I wanted this work to happen, and it didn't happen the way you thought it would happen. And the answer is, that's okay. God's will was done. Not in the way that you thought, but in His way, in His purpose, in His time, and His God is the one that's important. I'm the servant. He's the potter. I'm the clay. And so I have to be diligent in disappointment. Chapter 1, verse 3, chapter 2, verse 10, chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. This builds upon ditch the drama, diligent when you're disappointed, and do not allow distress to lead to despair. I am not saying that there's nothing going on here worthy of anxiety. You've got people, and they are growing, who are against you. There are problems that have not been dealt with for 70 years. I'm not saying there's not distress. We just can't let it lead to despair. I'm not saying there's not a reason to be upset. I'm not saying there's not a reason to cry. I'm not saying there isn't I'm saying don't let it allow you to fall apart, to go to despair. We're never going to be able to do it. This is bad. It is bad. You've been through situations in your life, trauma that has endured in your life, that has left scars, that it's still painful today. And when they get bumped, it hurts. I know. But I cannot despair. I've got heaven to look forward to. God never promised days without rain. He never promised that there would be no bumps. He never said that it would be easy. As a matter of fact, He said you become a Christian, you're still going to have a yoke, you're still going to have a burden, but it's a whole lot better than what the world offers. They will persecute you for my name's sake, and they will revile you, but vengeance is mine, not yours, mine, God. And so the city and the people are a reproach. In chapter 1 and verse 3, there will always be opposition. Chapter 2 and verse 10, there are 2 names, Sanballat and Tobias, 2 individuals of nations that are leading people in an ungodly manner. And when they see that Jerusalem really has some leadership and some things are starting to kick, they try to knock it down. And we do that sometimes for a whole variety of reasons, and many of them we don't even understand. When things start to go, I'll do something, I'll kick the legs out of it. Why? Because I like the drama. No, we already ditched that. Stop. Well, but there's a lot of stuff going on that you don't know. I'm moving on. I'm going over here. But look at chapter 2 and verses 19 through 20. those second guessers and those negative people, they can always find someone who wants to start a fire. And you cannot let that stop you. There will always be people who will second guess. There will always be people who will doubt. There will always be people who don't want to see you succeed and live a godly life and make the changes where you said, okay, you know what, I'm stopping this. And they'll say, well, we'll just see how well you can do it because I've got some friends over here. And we say, I don't even know why I'm trying. It just feels like I'm kicking against the goads. It just feels like I push it out and the wave I just quit. You cannot quit. Had an individual sitting at my table one time and we were talking. They wanted to get married and we went over some standards that God has for marriage and what's required if you're going to become a married couple in God's eyes. And they understood. They read Matthew 19:9. They read Matthew. They read through that. We sat there at the table and the husband-to-be said, well, I guess we don't have a right to be married, as we say. I said, well, it looks that's the way the Bible sees. I'm glad you see that. And he said to me, well, come on, so-and-so, let's go. There's no need. We'll see if we can find someone else to marry us. And the bride-to-be, who was very mad, said, you're telling me, and all the problems. I said, God says this, and you understand. She said, I understand what it says. She said, but we'll find somebody else to marry us. She got up and she started to walk out, and he looked at me, and I knew him from high school, knew him all my life. He said, well, Peter Ray, truth of it is I'm going to hell anyways. I might as well enjoy these few days, months, years that I have left. Thanks, man. I'll see you. No hard feelings. And he walked out. That is a lie that Satan whispers to us when we need to be shouting prayers to God. I'm going to hell anyways. I might as well just quit. That's a delusion from Satan. Don't believe it. Get thee behind me. Well, I can't do it. You know, this person over here, these people over here, whatever excuse I want, I can't do it. I'll never be able to make it. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. The problem is, because of the distress of a situation, we turn to despair instead of devotion and diligence. We allow all of this to become an excuse, and God says, don't do that. Judas went out and hanged himself. Peter went fishing, and when he saw the Lord, repented. There are times in our lives that you're going to say, I just wish I could die. I wish I could not wake up tomorrow. I wish this could all just be over. And God says, I'm with you. I'll prepare a table before those people, your enemies, and you can sit down and eat. I will lead you beside still waters. I will do everything. Your cup will run over. You just hold on to me, and I will carry you through. God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And if you look at the original language, here's what he says. I will never, 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 never leave you. You don't leave me, and I won't leave you. And tonight, if we can help you in a spiritual way, we hope that you'll come and allow us to pray with you and help you as we godly know how.